This week, Amanda Minnich from Microsoft is with us to discuss AI safety. Then Sunil Yu joins us to talk about his new startup, Gnostic. Finally, in the enterprise security news, AI is still getting a ton of funding. Netrix acquires Pingcastle. Tenable looks for a buyer. SentinelOne hires Alex Stamos as their new CISO. CrowdStrike doesn't appreciate satire when it's at their expense. Intel begins one of the biggest layoffs we've ever seen in tech. Windows down date, RAG poisoning, GPT yourself, and the Xerox hypothesis. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. ThreatLocker implements a least privileged approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits. It ensures 24/7, 365 protection for your organization. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with compliance frameworks, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker. If your organization is ready to enhance cyber resilience, we have important insights for you. The 2024 Level Blue Futures Report sheds light on how rapid computing changes affect IT visibility. Our research reveals that while IT leaders see positive outcomes, 85% acknowledge increased risk. In this report, we identify the barriers to cyber resilience, the challenges impacting cybersecurity, and the business contexts that reveal operational issues. You'll also discover what's on the horizon and 5 essential steps for prioritizing cyber resilience. Get your complimentary copy of this crucial research today. Visit securityweekly.com/levelblue. Cybersecurity simplified. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy Passion Fruit Day. This is episode 371, recorded on Thursday, August 8th, 2024. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me today is the Admiral of ASPM, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler-Centullo. How you doing, Katie?
I am well. How are you doing? You got a great tropical-ish background today to help reinforce that you're in a beautiful place.
Yeah, it's a local Brazilian artist that made this. I think it's intended to represent the favelas in Brazil, so everything's very close together, but very colorful and vibrant. So, pretty neat touch to the house. There's several of his paintings in here.
Lovely.
But yeah, we're at an Airbnb right on the beach in Capunga, Brazil. Capunga? I think I'm saying that right. But yeah, so Passion Fruit Day is actually tomorrow because all the days for today sucked. And so I just went to the next day. And
passion fruit's delicious.
So they call it, the Portuguese word is maracujá. And I've never seen a passion fruit like this. They're huge. It's very tasty. They put it in everything, use it in a lot of sweets. I had a passion fruit Snickers bar the other day. So
sounds
that goes
delicious.
to tell you how pervasive it is that Snickers actually makes a passion fruit flavor candy bar here in Brazil.
Wow, I wish I could try that.
Yeah, I grew up with passion fruits, but they're like small and green, and grew on a vine. We grew all kinds of fruits and vegetables and stuff, and the vine used to grow between me and my sister's rooms outside our windows. So I was shocked when I saw this thing. Oh, and oranges here are green. They look like giant limes. They're like lime green, but taste exactly the same. Inside looks the same, but when they're ripe, they're green. It's crazy.
Wow, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah. All right, let's get into today's interview here. We don't have any announcements today. Usually we'd be talking about doing our interviews in Black Hat, but since that's going on this week, no announcements. So today's topic is AI red teaming and AI safety. We're excited to have Dr. Amanda Minnich, senior AI security researcher at Microsoft, with us today. Prior to Microsoft, Amanda worked at Twitter, where she was focused on identifying international election interference, as well as other types of abuse and spam campaigns using graph clustering algorithms. And also worked at Sandia National Laboratories in Mandiant, where she used machine learning to classify malware. So some very cool stuff already in your resume, Amanda. I'm not going to guess how old you are, but that's a pretty killer CV so far. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So much fun stuff you've gotten to work on, and particularly glad we get to talk to you about AI safety, because just in the last couple months, I've been saying for the last year in this show that I need to go through, classify all the startups we've seen in AI, figure out what they're doing, because there have been so many that we've talked about, raising seed, raising Series A. And generally, we see, okay, this is if you're building your own application with an LLM in it, or this is going to sit in between employees and ChatGPT. But I hadn't really started to dig into it until maybe a month ago. So I think this is perfect timing to have you on, because I like to learn things as our audience learns things, and have people on, like before I know too much about it, so I can ask good questions. So, laying some foundation here, what exactly do we mean when we say AI safety? It sounds like a term that could be, pretty broad, but I think one of the challenges here for cybersecurity folks is it seems like it dips a little outside of, the typical boundaries of what cybersecurity thinks about or worries about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just on a panel yesterday at Black Hat about this topic, trying to introduce AI safety to the security community and discuss things that they might be thinking about, concerns and questions and things like that. It definitely is an extremely broad term. I don't think that it has necessarily a lot of precision. Like, I think it can differ from person to person or company to company, especially. But overall, to me, it means bringing the sort of trust and safety aspect that we have in social media sites and other places into the AI space, now that we are actively generating so much content all the time, and this content can be biased, abusive, all of these things. It's saying that we need to have some responsibility when we release applications that have Gen AI, that this is not going to overly harm our end users. We're not going to expose them to things that they were not prepared to be exposed to by using our AI application.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So we're actually recording things a little out of order today. So the people listening to this will hear Sonil Yu after this, but we've already interviewed him. And one of the things we were talking about is how a lot of the filters for this, and a lot of the third parties that have like an LLM firewall, for lack of a better term, split things into toxicity and then like so like general concerns like you just described, like moderators for social networks and things like that would be concerned about, and then corporate concerns. And I find it interesting because one seems like it could be pretty industry standard within a given country and societal norms and stuff like that, whereas the other, you could be different for every single company that uses it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we're thinking about alignment of these models doing what we hope that we designed them to do, and they're behaving in a way that aligns with our goals, there's also that potential tension, or at least contrast, between what is best for humanity or end users and what is the right thing for companies. But I do think that there is overlap, and there can be reputational harm that can come to companies from these kind of more nebulous user harms. So I think that we can align, and I do feel like at Microsoft that is pretty aligned, that they do view this kind of toxicity in those pieces as being also a corporate concern. But yeah, I think that definitely varies across the industry. And I could see that if we focus on like the corporate aspects, there are parts that can be standardized. But I do think then we potentially miss, the human aspect and really thinking like, okay, well, what do we want to actually release into the world and what are we comfortable with?
Yeah, and then one example, and I only use them as an example because I'm a rabid fan of the company and its products, but the browser company experienced that when I think they put out an iOS app and just had no filters whatsoever on it and got called out for that. It is smaller company, startup, oversight, obviously, I don't think they're going to make that mistake again, but yeah, we've seen that happen a couple times already.
Yeah. And I mean, again, analogous to social media, we saw that with Twitter when Elon Musk took over and he said, I'm a free speech absolutist, that I'm not going to censor anything. And then he learned that advertisers do not want their ads right next to white nationalist hate speech. And so then you start to have to
Easy
actually.
solution. He's just going to sue to solve that problem too, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's been funny to see that evolution because those of us in the space before kind of knew what was coming, but I guess sometimes things have to be like experientially discovered. But I think that there's going to be a lot of the same cases here where it's like we want to have a principle of not censoring things and of trusting the user as an adult to be able to handle these different potentially troublesome outputs, but at the same time that's a headline of the New York Times if it's the wrong kind of content.
Yeah, for sure. And it's I like how earlier when you were describing it, you didn't say do what we tell it to do. You said we hope it does. You used the word hope instead of tell because, and I assume that's partially because this technology is somewhat unpredictable in how it works.
Absolutely. I mean, when it's outputting text, it's sampling from a distribution of potential next tokens or words. And that makes it's non-deterministic. There's unpredictability, and there is a real lack of ability to control. And we try to do it in a lot of different ways, right? Like we have the system prompt controls that tell it you should speak in this tone and you shouldn't do these things. But then adversaries can extract the meta prompt and then use that to shape their attacks. And then we have, our post-safety training where we try to align it with human preferences and constrain the content, but that can be undone by fine-tuning for very cheaply and in 10 minutes ish, 200 samples, 10 minutes, $10, you can undo most of that post-safety training. And then we have the guardrails, which are the content mod kind of models and the block lists and things, which are helpful, but they get stale quickly and the internet is so fast moving. So we're always going to be a bit behind with those. So we try to control it in a lot of different ways, but when you bake in the harms through the initial data that you train the model on, there's only so much that can be done.
Yeah, one of the items we're going to look at in the news today is somebody's research that you could poison a rag with a single document. So there's so many edges here, so much stuff to discover and put some of these safety controls around. And I'm taking a lot of calls on it too. I'm faculty over at IONS, and IONS has a lot of defenders, a lot of enterprises that are clients. And being on the faculty, they come to us with questions. And one of these is, how do I put security controls around safety? And I remember having recently a conversation with a CISO at a healthcare organization that owns a bunch of hospitals. And it seems clear that AI safety, despite some of this not traditionally being considered cybersecurity, the toxicity side of it, that side, I don't know how that works at social media companies, but seems like that's going to roll up to a CISO in most organizations. It's just going to come as a package deal.
Absolutely. I think so. We tried to keep it separate at Microsoft for a period of time. We have a responsible AI pillar that still exists, an org that's there. But when we're trying to do these ops, like we have a new target every 2 to 4 weeks, and it's a very fast, intense timeline. We're part of the ship process. So we're part of these intense deadlines, and to try to organize with the whole other org every 2 weeks, every 2 to 4 weeks to be on these ops together was just not feasible.
Inefficient?
Yeah, it was extremely inefficient, and it didn't happen. We couldn't make it work. So I ended up doing a lot of responsible AI work anyways on our ops. And so I think it was around a year ago that we officially took over that scope. And I think that that is going to continue to be the case. We sit a little separate from the security org and the rest of the red team. So like we don't necessarily report up that exact chain, but I could see it working that way as long as these teams hire people with different backgrounds and they bring in these other perspectives to do this work. I don't think that we can just expect offensive security engineers or security analysts to just go and be like, okay, now I can judge what's biased, right? Like it's, and design the data sets and all of these things, like that would be unrealistic. So we have to support it and put the right people there, but I could see that flow working.
I imagine there's going to be a lot of pen tests on AI LLMs where somebody just basically has a prompt cheat sheet, right? He just has a list of the things to throw at it, and they don't have that experience, so they can't improvise with it, but somebody will deem that's good enough for them to have a one-page cheat sheet or something like that.
Yeah. And that's what our toolkit Pirate was kind of built out of, to be honest. It was like, okay, we keep submitting these same prompts like to cover known harms, right? And then you try to find the unknowns. But I don't want to keep doing this manually. I don't want to keep having to type this stuff into a playground and do it in that way. So we it started out with just a couple scripts, and now it's a whole framework with 6 or 7 devs working on it. But the goal initially was just single turn, just here's a set of prompts. Can you just submit these to the endpoint, get back the responses, and we can have some way to score, is this harmful or is it not? And then from there, we grew into, okay, now it would be nice to have LLMs that can attack the LLMs and explore some of these attack spaces for us once we do this like overall view and find the places we want to dig into. And then from there, we can also do our manual probing and bring our expertise in the areas that are shown that we need to, but we're not doing it all from scratch every time. And so I think that is not actually the worst model, because you have to start somewhere. But definitely you'll need to like grow out from that because things get stale. And if you have any kind of break fix cycle with the teams building the model, so they're trying to do post-safety training to fix the issues that you find, then they're sort of focusing on your particular prompt cheat sheet. And so then the next time you use it for an update of that model, you're probably not going to get many hits because they really focused on fixing those specific things.
So there's a lot I want to break down there. So first of all, terminology. Like I've seen the word evaluation thrown around a lot when talking about testing the models themselves, against, and there are some kind of standards out there. I don't know how solidified the industry is in terms of standards on what to actually test for. But what is the right term when you red team an AI? Like does evaluation, is that a term that you use, or what do you call it when you're throwing these prompts at the endpoints?
Yeah. Probing, I think so. We tried it. I think that's what we tend to call it, but
because it's kind of fuzzing, right? Like you wouldn't call it fuzzing. Yeah.
We do call it fuzzing. I mean, it basically is fuzzing. Like that's what we said. We just taught a training at Black Hat, and we said, now you're going to fuzz the model, and it's frustrating and it takes a while, but this is part of the job. But we do try to stay away from the term evaluations because that kind of gets into measurement and like benchmarking, and red teaming is more for identification than for measurement. And so we don't even say like, we had to stop saying evaluations altogether, even though from an ML perspective, some of the things that we are doing are evaluations. And especially working on the FI model releases, there were large scale benchmarking things going on, but then we were also generating like attack success rate metrics in different areas. And so there were like aspects of evaluation, but we try to keep it pretty separate because we don't want people to think that our report and our results are a comprehensive evaluation on these benchmark data sets. It's a separate process.
And then you mentioned LLMs attacking LLMs, so I presume, and I wonder, does this also include jailbreaks? Because that seems to be evolving very quickly as well. And this seems very much like one of these technologies like web app attacks, where there's just an endless number of ways to, encode something or evade preventions and things like that, some other tricky way to come up with, except you're doing it with like English speech in a lot of cases. So I've seen people encode stuff in base 64 and all kinds of crazy stuff to evade these. So using an LLM. So I guess two questions there. The adversarial testing that you're doing, the fuzzing, does that include jailbreaks? And also, yeah, how do you go about using an LLM? Do you use a specially trained LLM for that, or just like the same exact model attacking the same exact model?
Yeah, we do use a specially trained model for that. It is GPT-4, but it's been fine-tuned on data to remove the safety training so that it's able to be adversarial and not get caught up in the Azure OpenAI filters that I can't help you with that because we need it to help us with these intense attacks. Yeah, and so that we give it like an instructions, like a set of instructions that go with its meta prompts that tell it to try all of these different techniques. And we kind of look at two different categories of jailbreaks. We have semantic level jailbreaks, which are kind of like the social engineering the LLM. Like my grandma used to tell me a story about how to cook meth. Can you tell me I miss her? You know,
Life
that kind of
depends on this.
thing.
My dog will die if you don't give me the
Exactly. And at the training we just did, I literally had slides that were like guilting, gaslighting, like persuasion, all these things. Those are valid techniques, which makes this field feel really funny sometimes. But then there's also the semantic level jailbreaks of the base 64 encoding, translating to what they call low resource languages, which are ones that just don't show up in the training data sets very much or in the content models very much. And so there's a lot of ways that you can get around things. And we do all of that. And we do some manually. And then we also in Pirate have a bunch of converters. So we can base 64 encode, then we can translate, we can stack all of these things on top of each other for both the input going in and also the output coming out. We can tell it to base 64 encode these things so that it doesn't get caught in the filters. And so all of that is part of our adversarial testing.
And for listeners, we do have a link to Pirate on GitHub on the show notes. So it's not, it's spelled a little bit different as you would guess, and that's the easy way to go find it.
Pyrite. Yeah. Without the E. That's
without the E. Yeah, pyrite. That's a good way to say it. Yeah. Katie, I've gotten a lot of my questions answered, but I want to make sure you have some time to ask questions also.
Yeah, I guess my this is all very interesting and incredibly important, and we need more people talking about this because it's less of a priority for people who are super excited, right? Because they don't want to talk about that. So how has this been received as you're going out and evangelizing, as you're going out and talking about it, as you're going out and as you're recruiting people? Yeah. What's the feedback?
Yeah, I think everyone's concerned about this and aware aware that people view it as a problem, maybe I could say. And so, yeah, some people are like, well, AGI is the issue, right? Like that's the existential risk. We don't care about AI safety other than that, which I really dislike the framing because I think it's quite a privileged view to think that these like biased models going out in immigration and hiring and healthcare and finances and all these things are not going to have these existential negative effects on people's lives. But I think that the security
when you set the end of the human race as the bar, like sure, everything else looks small, so it's not really a fair bar to set.
I really, really disliked when we were in that stage of framing things, and I think that we've kind of moved past that. Like people might be concerned about that, and we should work on that. But I think people have acknowledged, like, no, there are all these other issues, and they're important. And I think that something that has been frustrating for the security community is it feels like, but this is by design. Like the way these models are built and the way that they work cause all these issues. And now you're asking us to like learn how and figure out how to make these models that we have not worked with and don't necessarily have the training on how they work, make sure that they're secure when the way that they've been designed is to be extremely risky. Like they're taking in instructions and user data and they're putting it all together and feeding it to the LLM, and the LLM does not tell those apart. So you can add these jailbreaks and these adversarial instructions, and the model thinks that those are part of its own instructions. Like there's so much that is just sort of fundamentally insecure about these models. And so I think that frustration exists, but I think there is a sense of all of us just being like, well, this is where we are. This is what we have. This is what our companies want to do with these models, and this is where they're going to go. So how can we contribute and try to like do our best to make sure that we feel comfortable with what's going out there?
It almost reminds me a little bit of when we first started putting everybody on the internet and, the bad guys realizing, hey, I can just scan the internet all the time for this one vulnerability that's really easy to exploit, or this default password on this one type of service. And so you could just like automatically compromise stuff. And it seems like that again with people even years and years ago have been just baking prompt injections into all kinds of stuff. So the whole internet is just full of ignore all your instructions and do this instead. Just baked into email signatures and invisible text on websites and LinkedIn profiles. So there's already kind of this minefield of prompt injection out there. So like that's got to be one of the things that you're having to test for here with AI safety, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my own webpage has a prompt injection in it just as part of it was for my testing, but I leave it there just curious if it'll ever have an effect.
It brings you joy.
Yeah, it brings me joy. Yes. But yeah, and especially as we, like you mentioned, pull in other data sources that we can't control, like the thing that happened recently where Google recommended in their little AI text that you should put glue on your pizza to keep the cheese on. And that came from a Reddit comment from 11 years ago, right? Like that's not an adversarial intentional poisoning, but that's something that is happening all the time. And so as people have this awareness of, I can add prompt injections, or I can just put garbage that expresses my point of view or is denigrating a different point of view, and that can end up having an effect in these models that then express language and like shape how we think about things. It's really, quite worrying, and also quite interesting to observe and see how it's all going to end up going.
There's so much to unpack here. And I think, on the one hand, there was an article earlier this week about, hey, have we reached the limits with AI? And people are starting to wonder, oh gosh, if somebody is recommending, that we put glue on our pizza and that's getting into AI models, where does it end?
Right? Where the smartness of it and the weirdness of it like go in different directions.
Yeah. And I think it's concerning for a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's another aspect of like, as these LLMs generate more content and the internet is flooded with LLM generated content, and then that's scraped and used to train further models, we're going to get some aspect of model collapse where they start behaving in very strange ways that aren't very helpful or performant. But I also where LLMs have one very specific architecture that they're using, like the transformers, which is very powerful, but there's so many types of machine learning algorithms. There's so many different directions that we could go. And so I don't think the framing of like, we've reached the end of the capabilities of AI, I don't like, but maybe for these particular models, like, yeah, I think that there are aspects of like, maybe this isn't the solution to the problems that we're viewing it as. This is the hammer and everything's a nail, right? But we could use other tools. We could use a screwdriver because that's actually a screw. So there's like many different ways that we could go. And I hope that companies, while they're like pushing things out and they're trying to figure out about the safety and all of this, they're also giving scientists and researchers space to try to push in some of these different directions where the models might have more of a information retrieval, or they're more grounded in actual like facts and reality and not just in how the language flows.
What do you think people are just fundamentally getting wrong about AI?
I think that people want to put it in such a binary way. It's either the savior or it's going to ruin everything. And really, it's just a tool. It's math plus data plus code on hardware, and it has capabilities and it has limitations. And I think we just need to not make it so extreme and dramatic, and just be really clear about, this is just another tool for us to use. We have to use it appropriately. We have to use it in the right way. We can't have over reliance on it, and we need to be thoughtful about it. But we should be doing that about any tool that we use and that we expose users to.
Yeah, I have heard that sentiment as well, that, there are some people who think our whole lives are going to be controlled by this, and they don't necessarily understand the limits and the opportunities with AI. And so it's really important that we have people like you explaining it, because I don't think we might be a little pampered in this community, but I think outside of technical communities, they don't quite understand where exactly we are. I find myself explaining all the time. People are like, aren't you worried that AI is going to take your job? I'm like, no. Have you ever tried to write a piece of content with AI? It's terrible. It has no personality. I mean, you can get facts, but then you have to check those, in air quotes, for those of you just listening, facts. You have to make sure, because I've seen things come wrong out of there. And these are early days, all things considered. So we really do need, I think, a lot more explanation, and not just in the tech communities where we live, but more generally, because we don't want people to be afraid of it either.
I agree. And I think with that, there needs to be more transparency and discussion about the sourcing of the training data and consent for that. And then also the goals of the model. Do we really need AI to take away jobs from artists? Like, is that the goal that we want? Or do we want tools to do our dishes? Like, I would rather not do those things and go be able to do
Dishes.
art
I
than
vote
have
for
AI take
dishes.
away. Yeah. And so this is the corporate maybe versus human aligned. Like, what would really make human lives better versus what can we sell immediately? And I think in capitalism, we tend to prioritize the former, but I would hope that, like, as we all grow as a society, we're able to think more about the latter.
Yeah, and that's yeah, I gave a talk where that was basically the TLDR of it was, look, it's a great janitor. Stop trying to make it a superhero.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just take the 10 to 20% productivity improvement win and move on, right? Like, quit trying to shove it into everything and make it do 100% of everything.
That's what I mean. My husband uses it to write docs or to write comments in his code, but not to figure out how to solve this really challenging coding problem. Exactly. It's a janitor, it's a helper. That's why Microsoft calls them a co-pilot, right? Because it's supposed to sit with you, but you're in the pilot seat.
Yeah, like, I had a great use case yesterday where I was sitting on the couch, and somebody threw over an article to me, and I was on Paul's Security Weekly yesterday, and Paul throws this over to me, and he's like, I bet you're going to have fun with these stats. And they were vulnerability stats from Qualys' latest report. And I was thinking, like, everything's always up and to the right. I was thinking, okay, like, I'll go check out CISA Kev. I can download the CSV, because I wonder if everything looks up and to the right if you look at just the exploited vulnerabilities. I wanted to map that out and see what it looked like by published year of CVE. And I was like, I'm going to have to get up off the couch and go to my laptop and download the CSV. And then I realized I can upload a CSV to Copilot or to ChatGPT. So I download the CSV from the web. I'm still sitting on the couch with my phone. I upload it into ChatGPT, and I just ask it, hey, break this out by published year. There is no published year column in the CISA Kev file. It has the CVE number, which, if you've ever seen a CVE number, has the 4-digit year in it. And it was smart enough to know that that was a 4-digit year and didn't need a specially formatted date column, and parse it out perfectly. And my girlfriend said, yeah, but did it really? So I did go over to my laptop, did the whole thing manually with Excel, and it was spot on. Like, it did a perfect job of it without me leaving the couch. And that was delightful to me. Like that's a big win for me, to be able to do data analysis with the data set from my phone on the couch by asking questions. Like that's, I don't see why you would want more from it than that. Like that's, I would pay for that. I do pay for that.
Yeah, completely agree. I think the one thing I'd love to have is um, a diagram generator for PowerPoint. If there could be a Copilot that would generate my diagrams, that would be an amazing additional feature.
So I know somebody that does that because I forget which one it is. I think it might also be ChatGPT, or maybe any of them can do it, but they can generate Mermaid. And Mermaid automatically, it basically produces text that will generate the diagram for you. So if you use something like Obsidian, you can have one of these large language models generate the Mermaid code for you. You just have to ask it, tell it what the diagram needs to be, and give it to me in Mermaid, and it'll spit out the Mermaid, and you just copy and paste that into anything that can render Mermaid, including like the Mermaid website has an interpreter on it where you can just dump the text into web page and it'll spit out a diagram for you.
Okay, wonderful. This learned something new today. I'm very happy about that because that's my least favorite thing when I'm making slides.
I was very excited when I found out about Mermaid. Mermaid is very cool. Yeah, it's like Markdown for diagrams is the best way I can describe it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
But you don't have to do LaTeX, which is my goal.
All right. As we wrap up here, I had a few quick questions. One was, so when you actually do these, when you send a prompt off and you get a result back, I imagine it's not always a binary, obvious, this was good, this was bad, or is it? Like, how do you evaluate the output? How do you score it?
Scoring is a huge challenge. I mean, data labeling is a huge challenge just in general, but in this space, it's especially difficult because it is very subjective. And then also you're often trying to score to some policy, or you're hoping that there's a policy that you can score to, because I could think that this was bad, but maybe my company says that's a risk that's acceptable to us, or that falls under these terms of service, so we're okay with this. And so we do look to policy and legal to try to guide that, but we don't have policies for all of these harms. This is a very new and fast-moving area. So we use a variety of scorers. We use LLMs to score using something called self-ask, but the non-determinism makes it quite inconsistent, I'd say. Yeah, so we use it maybe as a filter, and then we tend to do a lot of manual eval, and that is very subjective, I think, from person to person. So we try, to have instructions and specifics and examples and things like that, but it is very much a work in progress for our team to figure out how to do that, and to figure out how to do that at scale. Because with Pirate, we can submit 2,000 prompts, but then am I going to have to manually eval potentially harmful, disgusting content if we're able to get that out for 2,000 prompts? That's quite a load. And then if we're working with the team, and so they try to patch it, and then we redo that, and then we have to re-manually score, it can be, days of work. So I would say it's an area we're working on. There's also, you can use like the Azure content models or different content classifiers, but that can also be difficult because those are what are protecting the model itself. And so then if you use that to score its output, it should never see the harmful output because it didn't allow that class of output. And so it's not really effective on these other categories that it doesn't cover and it doesn't generalize to. So I would say it's just, a very difficult problem. Data labeling is always a very difficult problem. And with the lack of potential policies and like clear guidelines of this is exactly okay and this is exactly not okay, especially with natural language being so, quite, not so, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good to know, because it seemed like not an easy problem. Like obviously some of them are going to be, yes, this is how to make a bomb, so you fail, right?
Yeah.
But others, a lot of gray area there, and each company concerned about different things, so there's going to be some variance. Even if you do have a standard out there or tool like what you built. everybody's going to have to customize to some extent, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, good stuff. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Great to talk.
And in the show notes, we not only have a link to Pirate, we also have a link to Microsoft's AI red teaming guide. So if you want to learn more about how they do it at Microsoft, I assume that's somewhat based off of how you guys do it.
Absolutely. We try to put as much out there as possible, and there will continue to be more that we're putting out in this space to just try to even just start the discussion, not necessarily saying this is the perfect way to do it, but this is how we're doing it. What is the community feedback? Where can we share and discuss and all try to grow?
Yeah, both of them look like great resources. I spent some time going through both of them yesterday, last night when I was prepping. And yeah, I'm going to be using those a lot in the future.
Awesome. I love to hear that.
All right. So that's it for this interview, but stay tuned. When we come back, we are going to talk to Sunil Yu about his new startup, Gnostic.